Here we go. So far, so good. All right. So when we were last together, I believe this is where we kind of left off, is going over the generals of forming, storming, norming, forming, and a journey. And as I said, um, these this isn't just a straight path. Sometimes you can start with the development of groups, you can get into storming and norming, and then something happens and you have to start all over again. Sometimes you can actually go through forming and storming and almost seems like you skip the norming phase and go right to performance. And so I just want to point out that this isn't just, it's not a fixed thing. You can go back and forth and forward and back in, but it's a general way to think of the cycle of a group or a group. Okay. So let's go through the forming phase in more detail. So this is, of course, when a group is brought together and orientation to the group occurs. Okay. This is where a lot of times first impressions really have an impact on a group because you become aware of those people who will probably be more on a friendship working level, and those who you may want to avoid or are uncomfortable with. But in this forming phase is where all of these social dynamics, whenever you come into a group with a group of usually strangers, that instantly this kind of pull towards some people and away from others occur. And this is also where, as the facilitators, we introduce task objectives, where we really say this is why we're here, this is the goals of the group, and whatnot. So the amount of information and commitment and acceptance of the organization's goals is important. So you'll notice throughout this lecture, we use things like organizational goals and whatnot. I want you to think those in synonymous with um, uh, therapeutic goals. But the reason why we use the term organizational is because in the beginning phase, you also want to bring up what the goals and the mission and the vision of the organization that is sponsoring or supporting the group treatment is. Why is it that your organization exists? Whether it be governmental, private, nonprofit, what is it that, why are you in that community and serving that community? And so that's why we kind of use the term organizational goals, because it's not just limited to the therapeutic goals. You want the participants not to be wary of or misunderstand the goals, mission, and vision of the overall organization that is bringing about that group service. And I will say, especially if you're working in the private areas or the nonprofit areas, and if you're working in a lot of the governmental areas, people are very wary about coming to your organization because there might be ideas of an alternative motives or you're not really there to support them or you're just there for their insurance. And so this is a good opportunity to connect those clients with the organization that you're serving or that you're working under. Okay. Especially during this group, anxiety about the group, the tasks, and the performance capabilities all come to mind in the individual. So here we have a situation where, especially if this is a group that is largely done by people who are in the group for the first time, that they're very wary about the group process. And they're nervous about the tasks that are going to be asked about them and their ability to perform those tasks. Okay. And so this is where, again, going back to the introductory part of the course, we talked about that relationship building between you, the facilitator, and the group members. because that's really the only that relationship that you develop with the group members and whatnot is what relieves a lot of this anxiety. Okay. So just going in and starting the manualized group process and being kind of cold and offish is not the best way to relieve the anxiety of the group and increase something we call self-efficacy. Okay. Self-efficacy has been found to be just as important as other self issues such as self-esteem, self-worth, and important more global things like that. Self-efficacy is the belief that I can do X. Okay. And the reason I use the word X is it can be anything. It's the belief that I can uh, be a really good student on a global level, but it also might be I'm really good at taking notes, a very specific level. But in the group setting, self-efficacy is the belief that they can be successful in the group setting, that they have the ability to perform any of the tasks or therapeutic interventions that are going to be presented. And that can't be done without a strong alliance and relationship with the person that is there facilitating the group. Okay. And the reason why I say self-efficacy is important is you can have all the self-worth in the world, self-esteem in the world. You can think that you are a wonderful, incredible person, but if you don't have self-efficacy, it you'll it, the tasks won't get done. They won't be finished. You'll be spending your time with those defense mechanisms rather than engaging in the tasks of the group. Okay. And this is group efficacy, belief in the group's ability. And so uh, this one is on the individual level. Okay. To relieve this anxiety, we have to have self-efficacy. And then this last point is that we also have to have group. We have to have the group come together and have a collective belief that we can be successful in this group and the abilities of the group to move us all individually forward. Okay. And these are kind of what we would call success indicators. If you've successfully gone through the forming phase, there's reduced anxiety about showing up to the group and being involved in the group, and the development that the belief that the group has the ability to do what the group's task is, then you know that the forming phase of the stage is going very well. In the storming phase, whoops, in the storming phase, this is where human dynamics, as you would say, kind of start to come in play. This is where things like competitiveness and strained behaviors emerge over conflicts about roles and objectives. This is where you hear a lot of people using those defense mechanisms to kind of uh, say, I don't, trying to think of how to put this. I'm not as bad off as everyone else, or I don't belong here. Um, this is where things like dominant members start to emerge, and where we'll start to see a lot of the conflicts that can lead to frustration and anger. And this is where, and again, we'll talk about this in the class, this is where facilitators find themselves really engaging in conflict resolution. Okay. Um, but and making sure that competition between group members becomes resolved. This is also why in the norming phase, going back to here, I'm going to go all the way back. In the forming phase, not the norming, forming phase is where we want to make sure that the group rules are very clear and they're enforced from the beginning. So when we introduce the things like confidentiality, what are the group rules and whatnot, usually one of them is making sure that everyone has the same ability to talk. Um, and coming up with rules and ways of making sure that the dominant group members that will emerge, they do in every group, don't capitalize or take up the majority of the time for the group, that those who are in accept a less dominant role, those who are more shy and quiet and still are apprehensive about the group and the group setting, that they are encouraged to speak as well. And that's all a group facilitation thing. So the main thing for facilitation in the storming phase is making sure everyone's voice will be heard and is heard, that dominant members don't take over the group. And this is where a lot of conflict resolution skills will come into play. This is where you will use those skills that we talk about, I believe, at the end of facilitation skills lectures, that you really use those skills to reduce any conflict between group members or subgroups, because that is something that often develops in groups is cliques among members. Okay, so again, just to summarize this, as far as facilitation skills, making sure everyone's voice is heard and is supported and listened to. And again, this is usually where you'll use a lot of the conflict resolution skills to reduce any potential negative conflict. But as this last slide does state, conflict can be beneficial or is beneficial. Okay. Only from conflict can we move forward. Um, I can speak of, for example, addiction groups during the storming phase, when individuals who use the defense mechanisms of denial, saying, I'm not an addict, I don't have addiction. Well, usually it's during the storming phase where other group members are challenging that person's notion that they're not an addict. That conflict is what may is one of the first opportunities as the group facilitator in the group to really help that individual move forward and get beyond the denial phase into, yes, I'm here, I need treatment, I need help phase. Okay. And this is one of those opportunities. Also, during this conflict phase, a lot of individuals will, in the group settings, may also want to um, um, not accept other group members' perspectives, which is okay in some degree, but trying to decide that, they don't have it as bad as I do, or they have it way worse than I do, so maybe I don't belong here. Um, and you'll hear that very often, especially within the addiction arena and the violent survivor groups, that individuals will think, well, I don't have it as bad as that person over there, so do I really belong here? And that conflict is something that you can move forward with those individuals, and showing that they do belong here, that this isn't a comparison thing. This is an experience thing that we've all experienced. This thing called violence or addiction, and that it's not about who is worse off than the other person. Okay. All right. So once we get through those two phases, this is where the group will start to feel more positive about the group and what it is supposed to be there to do. Okay, this is so once we get through the conflicts and the vying for positions within the group and the coming together and understanding what the group is there for. Usually, if we successfully get through those phases, this is where we start to feel positive about what the group is and what it's supposed to, and that we are in it together. Okay. Um, this is where, and this is usually kind of a check mark to know where your group is this is where rules and norms of the group start to be enforced by the members instead of the facilitator. And you really kind of want to make that progression to where the group takes over its own um, personality, its own existence, and it's not needing kind of this professional there constantly having to enforce rules and enforce the norms and enforce what the group has agreed upon for that group. Okay. This is where the group kind of takes that over and starts to enforce their own group rules and norms. Okay. And so this is a good kind of, again, if you start to see this in your group, you know that you're effectively going through the norming phase of the group. Okay. And then, so so let's go through some of the norms that are kind of common within the group setting. So we have informal rules of behavior. So these can be things that are explicit or implicit rules. So example of explicit rules is usually when you go into a group, you have a set of rules, right? You have like the first five rules. And you go through those with the group. So usually there's, confidentiality, allowing others to speak, encouraging each other, those kind of, basic rules, be here on time, those kinds of things. But then usually what we usually do is after we go through those five or six rules, we will say, what other rules would you like to add? Okay. And I will say that some groups I've facilitated will say those are fine, those basic rules are fine. Others will add things like not chewing gum during group. What are some of the other ones that I've groups have decided on? Chewing gum, eating is one that some groups have added. Raising your hand to talk, all those, and so some groups get very, very specific. Others say more general, and the like. So those are those explicit rules that the group adds to it. And it's a good idea when you get to the norming phase of the group, once you get through the conflict, through that storming, that you revisit the rules of the group and you kind of say, are these still reasonable? Are there ones we need to add or take away? Okay. There's also implicit rules. Implicit rules can include where individuals sit during the group, to levels of eye contact that the group is comfortable with. Breaks sometimes become implicit, where the group just finally goes, it's time for break. Um, and so implicit rules are also part of this process. Okay. And these are widely shared and enforced by the groups. And this is an important point to be made, because this means that you're still in the storming phase, where you have one group member or two group members advocating for a rule, but the rest of the group really isn't buying into it. That this is an indicator that you're still kind of in that storming phase. When groups start to enforce group rules, it's usually shared widely by the group, and enforced by the group, not just specific individuals within the group. Okay. And they facilitate group survival. They want to know that predictability of behavior, prevent embarrassing situation, and express important behaviors. So these are all things that the environment they set up. And I will note that during the norming phase, you will notice group members that get in the group, they'll do their introductions, and one or two group members might say, "Hey, why is Tom not here?" Or they might notice an individual who is missing. If it's an open group and they're going through the norming phase, they might be asking, "Hey, who are the new group members?" Because the predictability, knowing that the same individuals will be there each week if I show up, is important. Predictability is also why each group is usually facilitated the same. We usually have a welcoming, we have a thinking type of check-in type of thing. We have a lesson, we have practicing skills, and then we have a thinking checkout of some type. And each group is facilitated this through the same process. Um, and then prevents embarrassing situations and expresses important behaviors are important. Okay. You'll also see during the norming phase, like dress, humor, attitudes towards organization, what is okay to take from the organization starts to be developed. So, in some situations, group members might say something that is less than flattering about the organization or about the group in and of itself. They might make jokes about the facilitator. They might, and the thing as a facilitator to note is these are not necessarily negative things. This is the group feeling comfortable with being able to express through humor or through attitudes about what they're seeing and thinking. And sometimes it's a testing thing to see if the facilitator will get defensive, if the facilitator will become angry or upset, like many people in their life when they've tried to express themselves. And so this becomes an important time for the facilitator to remember that one, they might just feel comfortable enough to express themselves, or two, they might be testing you to see what your reaction will be. Are you here with us in this group setting? Okay. So just some things to kind of look at. When you look at norm development is explicit statements. I don't know why this hasn't changed. It should say by the facilitator about norms, but also I think the reason why I left it at top management is sometimes you'll get leaders in groups that develop. Critical events take precedence, meaning that when a person comes in, let's say during a thinking check-in, and they've had an awful week, the group may spend extra time focusing on that. Okay. Primacy behaviors and recency become important instead of past experiences. Um, and you'll also start to hear more about if they've been in groups before, kind of their experiences and then the experience they're having now. And that's kind of the norm development for individuals. Okay. So one thing we do want is group cohesiveness. This is the measure of loyalty to the group by its members. Okay. And there's kind of some things to uh, look at when we're looking at the cohesiveness of a group. So level of participation. Cohesiveness rise, so will participation. So participation helps group members actively be involved, but too much can waste time. And this is where the trick of being a good facilitator comes in, is if you spend, for example, an entire group, let's say during this group you want to accomplish three tasks or three goals for the group, but the group gets stuck on talking about, let's say, goal two or task two, and you don't get to the rest of them. This can then interrupt the ability for the group to move forward. And so managing when a group is starting to get deeply involved in a topic, and how do you keep it moving, is really important without denying individual voice on that topic. And we'll get to some of the ways to do that later on. Okay. Levels of conformity. As conformity rises, so does cohesiveness. But again, too much conformity, performance can suffer. So when a group feels like they have to conform to what everybody else in the group is saying or stating, this is where you see individual performance suffering. This is where individuals will, for example, if you do homework for a group, they might not do all the homework or be deeply involved with it, because what they're going to do is just answer the same answer that the group gives next time that homework or whatever activity is discussed. So conformity is kind of, you want to kind of keep it on the general level that we all agree to do our individual homework or our individual tasks and come back and talk about it next week. But that doesn't mean that you will have the same experience as the person sitting next to you or the group, and kind of keeping that healthy separation between what you should be experiencing as a group versus what you should be working on as an individual. Level of group accomplishments. As group cohesiveness rises, the emphasis on group accomplishment will rise. High levels of cohesiveness can cause the group to focus more on itself than the firm. Okay. And what this means is more on the group than what the group is there for. Okay. And so that's another thing to kind of keep. It's that saying, moderation in everything. I think these three things are kind of emphasize that. You want them, but too little, you won't have a good group togetherness. Too much, you lose that as well. The individual performance, as you would say, you lose that if it's too high. So, what are some the determinants of cohesiveness? Based on that, one is group size. So again, around unless we're talking about two couples therapy, we want between 4 or 9. If you get two below that, you don't get a lot of the diversity that is really necessary for group movement. Once you get around 4 and above to about 9, that's kind of the golden region for group size as far as cohesiveness is concerned. Manage diversity. Diverse groups often come up with better solutions. Group identity. When cohesiveness is low, encourage groups to adopt a unique identity, engage in healthy competition with others. What this means is the groups will usually naturally kind of develop their own identity, meaning that they will consider themselves such and such group, or a member of is one of the terms they'll start to use. If you have low cohesiveness, if the group's not really coming together, it might be a time to talk about what is your identity as a group? Who are you guys? And have them come up with their own identity of what that group is. And then success, cohesiveness increases with success. And this is why it's important when doing things like thinking check-ins and everything. The natural propensity is to look at individuals' problems and issues they're going through. But just equally important as a group facilitator, is recognizing individual successes when they do thinking check-ins or when they successfully do a task or go through a process and making sure that those are explicitly um, stated. Okay. So again, kind of some other things to kind of talk about here, and then I think we'll finish with this today. Is what are some factors that influence cohesiveness? We talked about having common goals, success experiences, size, and I want to pause right here. Um, is interpersonal attraction. Okay. Um, there's plenty of research in treatment and group treatments to kind of show this, but I kind of want to give a different example, um, uh, coming more from education, dealing with teachers in early childhood and kindergarten, first and elementary years, where what you hope for is that when you send your child to a classroom, that you have a teacher who provides the same treatment to all their children, the same amount of attention, the same amount of time, the same amount of energy goes towards each child. Okay. And so I just want to bring up some kind of interesting research. These researchers went to classroom where the teacher's philosophy is to treat every child the same, that every child deserves the teacher's attention, deserves a teacher's time, kindness, discipline, all of those kinds of things that they explicitly state that they do not treat students unfairly. Okay, but then let's measure that. So let's measure that over a semester or a time during school. And even with the most altruistic teacher, we find that if we kind of divide children on their attractiveness, I should say in that cuteness, let's use that term because attractiveness in adult terms has a romantic element to it. So they divided kids by their cuteness level. Let's put it that way. Um, and we can also divide them by here in the United States by racial categories, all of those kinds of things. But what we found in even the most altruistic teacher that we can find is that they do provide the cutest students with more positive feedback, less punitive feedback on things they do wrong. They provide them with more time, more eye contact, more positive affirmations. And then with our less cuter kids, they tend to provide more negative feedback, more, why can't you just do this type of attitude, more punitive actions, more punitive write-ups. And really, it is just based upon the looks of the child. Okay. Um, so that's kind of a clear example you can see about the physical appearance of children, just children themselves. And even if you're the most altruistic person in the world, we find measure-wise, we still provide people who are cuter with more time, more positive attention, and those who are less cuter with less time and more negative feedback and punitive feedback. Okay. Let's bring this now to even the adult group setting. Okay. We find this to be true in the group setting. We find that when we record groups, even the facilitator who says they treat their group members the same, will give the more attractive group members more time, more positive feedback, and the less attractive participants less time, more punitive feedback, and less encouragement. Okay. And I will say, I've went through this process in training and everything else, and to actually see it, and for someone, the supervisor to sit, now I want you to see how you react to this person who had the same event as this person and how you treat them different. And I hate to say it, even on my own individual level, I've got stuck into this unconscious world where it came to light, I didn't treat them all the same, even though I thought I did. And so, even on beyond research, this is something that I have experienced myself, even though I've thought myself to be a fair group facilitator. So, this is something that I would encourage you all to be aware of because not only does it happen to the facilitator, but it happens to the group members. And this is where, on an individual level, issues such as interpersonal relationships, more uh, wondering about what an individual thinks about me because of their level of attractiveness, rather than should I be focusing on this coping skill to prevent a relapse. And so managing those interpersonal attractions is important. And for the facilitator, this means you have to consciously make the effort to make sure every group member is treated the same and at the same level, regardless of their physical aspects or their physical attributes. Okay. And I will also say this is also when we get into ethics, where facilitators often can end up making very poor decisions. Okay. Um, the other issue that you might want to also consider, especially when you're dealing with groups and you're meeting just once a week and then life happens the other um, days of the week and hours of the week, is things known as external threats. So this is how does family members and friends think about this individual going through the group process? How, what events in their life are going to influence their performance in group today? And that's kind of why we do those check-ins, like what were some of the successes during your weeks and what were some of the challenges during your week, right? Because we want to measure external threats in that if a person is currently, their spouse left them this week and their family is wondering why they even come to this group, that group may not be an effective place for them right at this moment. And really sitting down with that individual and working through those might be a better use of a break time during that group. Okay. Um, Individuals that are thought to be high status also can influence cohesion. And when I talk about high status, I just don't mean, for example, people who come to the group from the majority population or from high social economic status or higher education. I've done treatment groups with people who have PhDs, MDs, and in the same group, individuals who didn't even have their high school education. And that status thing can play a major role. Is that unfortunately what people who feel they're in a lower status do is they tend to yield to whatever the person in the higher statuses start to state. Um, and this is where, as a facilitator, you want to make sure you provide equal room to talk, and that not everybody, even if they have a PhD, doesn't mean that they're right, because they're also in the same place as a person who doesn't even have their high school degree or who hasn't achieved their high school degree yet. they're still in the same space and they're occupying that same space. No one is better than anyone else. The other part of high status that I want you to be concerned about is things like charisma. Okay. If there was one recommendation I would make if you're doing things like anger management or domestic offenders groups or even some addiction groups, is to weed out individuals who are psychopathic. Okay. Because it has been shown in research after research that people with pathology come out of groups worse than what they came into, and they also have a spreading effect on the other group members, and the effectiveness of other group members do a lot less. Okay. And an example of this is one of the very first offender groups I did. I was sitting in the group. I was more of I was more there just to learn about the group. So I was kind of there in kind of a listening, kind of learning mode. And there was this gentleman um, who who famously put his wife in the San Francisco Bay, was there for an offenders group, and he would play off the emotions of the group facilitators. And he would say things that he felt would personally rile up the facilitator. And once the facilitator got upset or got frustrated, the individual would look at them and say, "Ha, you're not in charge of this group anymore. I am. I have you." And this person, because of that ability in that group, ended up having high status according to the other group members. They were like, aha, look at this person. They're able to emotionally control the facilitators and the group members and kind of control the conversation and do all of these kinds of things. When you have an individual like that in a group, it's important to reconsider the configuration of the group, because in a lot of those situations, there's nothing you're going to do to change that individual. They need to be sent to a more proper, elevated level of treatment than what a group can do. So that's another version of status that you want to look for, is those group members who try to manipulate the facilitators to get some certain type of emotion out of them and then can claim victory over the group. Okay, so that's something to look out for. So cooperation as well. Um, this is when groups start to work together to solve problems. Even during check-ins, when someone mentions a problem, the group kind of slows down and says, "Hey, what are some things that we maybe you could do to consider to kind of help with that?" And when you start seeing that, that's another positive uh, note that your group is headed in the right direction. Okay. All right. So,
Professor, I have a
yes.
question regarding that. Um, when you do